As we go through the slides, if you notice, some of the comments will be in yellow. Those are my comments, not to be confused with somebody else's. So just to let you know that in advance. And so we're going to be talking about motion and consciousness. And let me go to the next slide so you can see the variety of ideas we'll be going over. And I want to talk about motion as we experience it phenomenally first. So we'll be going over some of very basic types of motion, how we measure motion, some of the considerations in modern physics these days, and the conservation of energy, the law of conservation of energy. Not to be confused with energy conservation, although they kind of relate. Then we're going to be going more into more abstract ideas, including this, the idea of the great breath, motion as a pattern, and some religious and spiritual as well as philosophical references. And then we'll be moving into motion and its relation to intelligence, Bohat, and finally some words from KH on motion. Let's see if I can move this thing. There we go. So the ancient pre-Socratic Greek philosopher Heraclitus was quoted by Plato, noting that everything changes and nothing stands still. Heraclitus noted that one cannot step in the same river twice, and that there's nothing permanent in the world except change. And it's interesting because not only do we not step in the same river twice, we also don't step in the river with the same foot twice, because we know that there are all kinds of molecular and atomic changes happening to our bodies at all times. It's not moving. Okay, what happens when you're, oh, there we go. Wasn't pressing hard enough. So motion is around us all the time, everywhere. Even if we perceive something as being standing still, there is still constant motion going on in our environment. We have to ask ourselves, you know, where would we be without motion? Consider the concept that he who exists in light alone never knows light, because in order for that individual to understand something, they have to have something to compare it with. It has to have some kind of relative existence to their own experience. And observing changes in ourselves and in our environment allows us to evolve by developing not just sensory abilities and memory and associations that help us with survival skills, but also enables us to be able to reason, to critically assess our states and conditions of ideas, such as ethics and morality, and our ability to ponder both mundane and philosophical questions, which are the whys and the hows of life. And it allows us to form mental abstractions. It enables us to develop the ability to perceive from multiple points of view and to be inspired. And when we're inspired, we can imagine. This is something that is not part of the animal community except for the human being. Imagination, from our friend Albert Einstein, he writes, is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. And here, HPB wrote about imagination. She writes, imagination is again one of the strongest elements in human nature, or in the words of Dugald Stewart, it is the great spring of human activity and the principal source of human improvement. Destroy the faculty and the condition of men will become as stationary as that of brutes. It is the best guide of our blind senses, without which the latter could never lead us beyond matter and its illusions. The greatest discoveries of modern science are due to the imaginative faculty of the discoverers. And this is in her collected writings. I just added to that, move that up here. We might ask ourselves what inspires a scientist or would-be discoverer to explore beyond his own immediate knowledge of any one thing, to flirt with ideas that in some cases go against common accepted theories or approaches. There can be no progress, no evolution without motion of mind. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I can't get my thing to go forward for some reason. Oh my gosh, here we go. So what is motion? I'll kind of look at it in the way we see motion in this phenomenal state. In physics, motion is the phenomenon in which an object changes its position over time. The motion of a body is observed by attaching a frame of reference to an observer and measuring that change in position of the body, that's the body being perceived, relative to that frame with the change of time. And I wrote in here, it's relative in part because of the position of the observer. The observer plays a big part in the way something is observed. For instance, a table in the middle of the room appears to be standing still in the frame of the room. The room appears to be standing still. But an observer standing on the moon will observe that the Earth is rotating and is also orbiting around the sun. And a closer look at the table itself reveals an ocean of moving atoms and molecules. So we know that even when something appears to be basically static, it is constantly moving. Anything that's visible or invisible is moving. There's some real basic types of movement. These are just 3 of them. That out of the way. There's a rectilinear motion, which basically describes a straight line. And they give an example of a launch of a rocket or a car moving in a straight line or in a straight road. A circular motion, this type of motion, this is a motion in which the distance between the object from a particular fixed point remains the same or constant. For example, the movement of the hands of a clock or the rotation of Earth around the sun. It can also be called as rotational motion if the object moves in a circular motion on its own axis, such as in the case of a spinning top. So here in that case, you have a center, and then you have, which you could call your equilibrium point, and then you have motion that basically orbits around that center. And then you have periodic motion, which they also call to and fro motion, which is what you would see in a pendulum, where you have a point A and a point C, the B being the point of equilibrium. And I wrote down here in the corner, could all these movements be circular? Because even if we look at something that seems to have a beginning and an end, and to us might look like a linear pattern, could it be in fact a circular pattern that we're only seeing a small part of? So if we look at a circle in terms of, let's give, for instance, life and death, we see it in a linear pattern as going from a beginning to an end, but we're only looking at a small portion of a circle. And so when we only look at that small sliver on that circle, it appears to us to be a beginning and end, or a rectilinear pattern, but it's in fact circular. I don't know why this thing won't work. There we go. So when physicists measure motion, or when any of us try to measure motion, there's certain properties that have to be taken into consideration. We mentioned position. There's also displacement, distance, velocity, acceleration, speed, and time. And these properties are fine for one-dimensional graphing, but for three-dimensional observation, we have to take into consideration the relative position of the observer. The observer is so important because, and I give an example here, if we're watching a bicyclist moving away from us, directly in front of us, we'll see the motion of the pedal is going up and down. But if we take a side view, of that same bicyclist, we see that the position of the pedal is going in a circular motion. So very slight changes in our position can really, change the way we perceive things. Here's a simple harmonic oscillation. We talked about a pendulum before, and notice that the B represents an equilibrium state, a state of equilibrium. So I'll just read here. Repetitive motion back and forth through an equilibrium or central position so that the maximum displacement on one side of the position is equal to the maximum displacement on the other side. So the time interval of each complete vibration is the same. So this is basically simple cause and effect so that you have equal and opposite forces operating on each side. And in this case, the point of suspension, B, is your point of equilibrium. We see the same thing in the oscillation of the sine wave. We can see here that it has its valley and its peak, both equal to each other, but then you have this point in the middle, which would be your point of equilibrium. So we're seeing at least 3 points, has to have at least 3 points. And we know that there is a formation to this, that there's a law that dictates how motion is conducted and how form follows that motion. Where there is motion, there is law. Where there is law, there is motion, and both are incessant and tend toward harmony. I'm going to talk a little bit about the law of conservation of energy, which is the law, which is also the first law in thermodynamics that states energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy can be transferred to another object. It can be transformed from one type of energy to another, and it can be stored as potential energy. That's stored and as it awaits to be used as kinetic energy or movement. It can also be dissipated. And what that means is, if you see over here, you have this thermoelectric hydro plant here, which is taking in water, rushing water and forcing it through into a turbine, forcing that turbine to move, and then basically transferring that energy into electricity. And if you see, there's a lot of water vapor that's escaping. And you would call that dissipated energy because it's not being destroyed. It's just going somewhere else and doing something else in the environment, but it's not, nothing is ever destroyed. So Albert Einstein said that mass and energy can be converted into each other. When matter is destroyed, and I put this in quotes because, like we just said, it can't be destroyed. Energy is created. Okay, once again, nothing can be created. When energy is destroyed, mass is created. So he redefines the relationship between energy and matter as basically one thing with two states, as a thing and as a force. But again, it can't be destroyed and it can't be created. So those terminologies probably shouldn't be there. And we see an example of this in photosynthesis. So if we say the law of conservation of mass states that in a chemical reaction, mass is neither created nor destroyed. And we see this in photosynthesis as we take, or our environment takes the sunlight, which is light energy, and converts it into chemical energy. And that provides a way for an organism to grow. And it also allows for that organism to store for other uses. And from there, some of those chemical energies are stored in carbohydrate molecules, which are synthesized from carbon dioxide and water. It's really a pretty picture. I love that picture. And here's some examples of potential energy. Now, this is energy that's stored up, waiting to be used as kinetic energy. Here's some various examples of the transformation of energy. I was hoping somebody in our who's here today could probably read this. This is taken from the Secret Doctrine. It's actually a footnote on page 507, but it speaks directly to the fact that everything is, whether it's visible or invisible, is in constant motion. Would someone like to read this? Anyone?
I could read it if
While
you
I
want.
grab some water.
Or Monica has a beautiful voice. Would you be willing to read, Monica?
Sure, thank you. Everything visible and invisible is in constant motion. Something dead implies that it had been at some time living. When at what period of cosmogony? Occultism says that in all cases when matter appears inert, it is the most active. A wooden or a stone block is motionless and impenetrable to all intents and purposes. Nevertheless, and de facto, its particles are in ceaseless, eternal vibration, which is so rapid that to the physical eye, the body seems absolutely devoid of motion. And the spatial distance between those particles in their vibratory motion is considered from another plane of being and perception as great as that which separates snowflakes or drops of rain. But to physical science, this will be an absurdity.
Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.
So how can we measure all the small stuff? Now, we talked about some properties of measurement when it comes to things that we can see. But what about things that we can't see that are on the atomic level? We'll call it quanta, which is or little packs of energy. So modern physics has been looking into this for almost a century now, really. But the field of physics is commonly subdivided into two large categories: one, classical or Newtonian, and then modern physics. So in the early 20th century, completely new concepts about the nature of matter were reintroduced. Einstein's revolutionary theories on general and special relativity, Planck's quantum theory, and if we ever want to do a special meeting talking about black body radiation and the ultraviolet catastrophe, that would be great. Heisenberg's principle of intermediacy and the concept of the equivalency of matter and energy. So the disadvantages of classical theories were that they could not explain what was happening behind the scenes in the submicrocosmic world, or plot atomic motion in the same way as before. So they had to adopt some new ways of determining via probabilities how atoms and particles move. So it's probabilities because they can't really narrow down what an atom is doing. And I'll go on to our next page here. So it's kind of like, when we talked about measuring time and distance and space, we had those various properties of the perceiver, the thing being perceived, and then the frame of reference. So in the quantum world, those things kind of all come to a blur. So you had to find some new methods and technology to be able to even begin to try to figure out what those particles were doing. In quantum mechanics, energy is absorbed or emitted by atoms in tiny energy packets, or quanta of energy, which move on to the next atom and so on, and are viewed as streams or beams. Their movements often too difficult to track with any specificity, and that's why it's not determinable, and they deal with probabilities. But this is kind of interesting when we watch what happens with the photon and the electron. When a photon collides with an electron, there is an increase in the quantum energy of that electron. This makes the electron jump or leap into the next quantum energy level. The size of the jump is dependent on the photon's energy. Electrons in this excited high energy state will soon jump back to their original position or their ground state, and in doing so will emit a photon. And I think this is kind of interesting because it brings to my mind, a certain archetype that we can talk about later, but about something lighting something up. When we talk about, for instance, and then there was light, what are we talking about? Does it also apply to the atomic world? So some of the questions that physicists are asking right now is, what is actually happening during a quantum jump and when do they occur? Are particles actually jumping from point A to Z, or are they taking other intermediary steps that are currently not visible? Are their movements random? In other words, nothing is really guiding them, or is it deterministic and there is actually some kind of law that's determining its motion? So basically, is nature rolling the dice, or are there strict rules governing the movement of even the smallest bodies known yet? So Erwin Schrodinger, he actually came up with the theory that quantum phenomena was basically based in resonance, or a wave. A wave is a disturbance of a physical quantity undergoing simple harmonic motion. So we saw the sound wave, right? So he's basically saying, and he provided a way to calculate that wave function. And he also proposed that the jump of the quantum, when it jumped, there were intermediary vibrational modes that it had to go through. But he also stated that you needed to be able to isolate the actual atom, the actual particle, to be able to tell what it was doing. That if you were just looking at a big, a beam of particles that were going all over the place and interrupting each other, that was chaos. So let me see if we can get in here. And then Prince Louis Victor, Deborah, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but I'll say Broglie. He proposed that nature is symmetric. If electromagnetic or EM radiation has both particle and wave properties, then nature would be symmetric if matter also had both particle and wave properties. So we have these gentlemen back in, the early to mid, I would say the early 20th century onto the early 21st century, really digging into these ideas. Boy, and you have to imagine they must have had an imagination beyond what the science was dictating at that time. It's not letting me go forward again. I think I need to get my computer changed.
Have you tried the arrow keys as well?
Try to go forward. Yeah, my keys aren't working for some reason. Come on, space key. Okay, I wonder if I should go into a different mode. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
I got it. And so this is taken from, speaking of waves, maybe someone else would like to read this. This is taken from the SD volume 1, 633.
All right, I can do that then.
Oh, go ahead.
you.
Sure. The waves and undulations of science are all produced by atoms propelling their molecules into activity from within. Atoms fill the immensity of space, and by their continuous vibration are that motion which keeps the wheels of life perpetually going. It is that inner work that produces the natural phenomena called the correlation of forces. Only at the origin of every such force there stands the conscious guiding noumenon thereof, angel or God, spirit or demon, ruling powers, yet the same.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And here, speaking to the movement, the pattern of movement under law, if we know that movement, or that there are fractals and spirals and all of these shapes in nature that are mathematically perfect, we have to not understand that those shapes are coming from a movement that is also math-based and perfect. So pattern movements result in pattern formation. Here's a few of them listed here. So we have fractals and spirals and Ranoi. Here are some more examples. And I wrote here, nature is more than simply an intelligent operation. It is the source through which all intelligence and intelligent design springs. So it's not enough to say that nature is intelligent or has intelligence. It is actually that which through it, all intelligence springs. It's the font of intelligence. And the most basic movement that we can think of is the universal breath, or the cosmic breath. Internal to external, centripetal to centrifugal, expansion, contraction, inspiration, expiration, ebb and flow, evolution and involution, input, output, action and reaction, and the one from no number. We see an on and an off. There's a simple duality that exists. We don't breathe in and keep breathing in. There's a natural process to the breath. And in fact, we could even say, if we go back, I think I skipped something. I'm not using this thing anymore. So anyway, breath and spirit, or I should say spirit, comes from the Latin spiritus, a breathing, a respiration, and a relation to the wind, breath of the gods, hence inspiration. Pythagoras believed that the particles in the air, or the force that moved them, were soul. And Heraclitus declared that the soul, as the first principle, was a warm exhalation of which everything else was composed. There are all kinds of biblical references to breath, too many to mention. I just brought in a few of them that seem to really go along with what we're talking about. So the biblical concepts of God's breath symbolizes life and a primordial and powerful force. It serves as a universal force throughout the Bible. God breathed the breath of life into Adam. And in Genesis, the spirit, the Hebrew word roach, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, of God moved upon the waters. Rock can also mean breath, air, or wind. I'm sorry, but this is covering up a lot of my a lot of the words. But down here in Ezekiel, then said he unto me, prophecy unto the wind, prophecy, son of man, and say to the wind, thus saith the Lord God, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain, that they may live. And in Psalms, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. Yeah. And here are some other spiritual references to breath in the ancient Egyptian Ka. It means the reception of the life powers from each man from the gods. It is the source of those powers, and it is the spiritual double that resides with every man. Is an image of Ka here, and you can see that the man has two regular arms, human arms down here, and up here on his head, there are two other arms that are kind of reaching up. These two representing duality. And I think this middle part here might even be a rest, because when we think about breath, it actually has three parts. You have the inhalation, the exhalation, and then you have a rest. Actually, it's more of a triangle. The Sanskrit prana is the Sanskrit word for breath or breath of life. Prana represents the life energy that vitalizes all things, physical and sensory, mental and spiritual. We talked a little about the Hebrew rock. And Chinese qi is believed to be the vital force forming part of any living entity. Qi or qi translates as air and figuratively as material energy, life force, or energy flow. And orenda is the word that refers to, excuse me, the life force among the Iroquois, and it means breath or spirit. Excuse me. Would someone like to read this while I take a sip of water, please? Anybody?
In Hindu
Sure.
mythology, the creator who breathes forth the universe at the dawn of creation and withdraws it at the end of his day, for 4,320,000,000 human years. The name is derived from the Sanskrit root brima, which means expand, increase, or grow, and is related to the neuter noun Brahman.
Thanks again, Anthony. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about motion and consciousness as we move into more abstract ideas. Excuse me, does anyone else like to read? Monica? Anybody?
Go ahead.
All right. I'm sorry. I could do that if you wish.
That would be great.
So SD Prom, page 2, HPB preparing the student for abstract thinking. It is the one life, eternal, invisible, yet omnipresent, without beginning or end, yet periodical in its regular manifestations, between which periods reigns the dark mystery of non-being, unconscious yet absolute consciousness, unrealizable yet the one self-existing reality. Its one absolute attribute, which is itself eternal, ceaseless motion, is called in esoteric parlance the great breath, which is the perpetual motion of the universe in the sense of limitless, ever-present space. That which is motionless cannot be divine, but then there is nothing in fact and reality absolutely motionless within the universal soul.
Thanks again. See if we can move here. And I'll read this. I'll try not to break my voice here. This is from SD Volume 1, page 43. Again, we're talking about the very beginnings of the secret doctrine. So she's really trying to get her students to contemplate things on a very abstract level, even before we go into the stanzas. The appearance and disappearance of the universe are pictured as an outbreathing and inbreathing of the great breath, which is eternal, and which, being motion, is one of the three aspects of the absolute, abstract, space and duration being the other two. When the great breath is projected, it is called the divine breath and is regarded as the breathing of the unknowable deity, the one existence, which breathes out a thought, as it were, which becomes the cosmos. So also it is when the divine breath is inspired again, the universe disappears into the bosom of the great mother, who then sleeps wrapped in her invisible robes. So we talk about motion and consciousness. We have to talk about what is the difference between consciousness in the way we generally speak of it and consciousness in terms of its absoluteness. And she writes, consciousness implies limitation and qualification, something to be conscious of and someone to be conscious of it. But absolute consciousness contains the cognizer, the thing cognized, and the cognition itself, all three in itself, and all three are one. So if you can imagine, the subject, the verb, and the object now have all become one thing, or oneness. And she's drawing links between Bohat and this motion. She writes, just as the opposite poles of subject and object, spirit and matter, are but aspects of the one unity in which they are synthesized, so in the manifested universe, there is that which links spirit to matter, subject to object. This something at present unknown to Western speculation is called by the occultist Bohat. It is the bridge by which the ideas existing in the divine thought are impressed on cosmic substance as the laws of nature. Bohat is thus the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation, or regarded from another side, it is the intelligent medium, the guiding power of all manifestation, the thought divine transmitted and made manifest through the Dian Chohans, the architects of the visible world. Thus, from spirit or cosmic ideation comes our consciousness. From cosmic substance, the several vehicles in which that consciousness is individualized and attains to itself, or reflective consciousness. While Bohat in its various manifestations is the mysterious link between mind and matter. I think that's an interesting point here. It's the mysterious link between mind and matter. It's the animating principle electrifying every atom into life. One thing that comes to my attention when we think about motion and the laws of nature is that something, and following with the law of conservation, is that something cannot be formed from nothing. Intelligence cannot spring from non-intelligence. If we know that right off the bat, then following the law of conservation, we must think, oh, consciousness as a living force cannot be destroyed or created, only transformed. So nature is not only intelligent, it is the font through which all intelligence flows. The font of all that was, is, or will be. And to go along with that and to kind of be reflective of what we talked about with regards to atoms, atoms are quantumly entangled, and through that relationship have memory. Cellular memory connotes memory in its constituent parts, or atoms. So everything that has intelligence, we can say, has some kind of memory attached to it. She writes further on Bohat, it is through Bohat that the ideas of the universal mind are impressed upon matter. Some faint idea of the nature of Bohat may be gathered from the appellation cosmic electricity, sometimes applied to it. But to the commonly known properties of electricity must in this case be added others, including intelligence. And she writes somewhere else too that occultists consider Bohat to be an entity. The mother sleeps, yet is ever breathing, and every breath sends out into the plane of manifestation her protein products, which, carried on by the wave of the efflux, are scattered by Bohat. and driven toward and beyond this or another planetary atmosphere. Once caught by the latter, the atom is lost. Its pristine purity is gone forever unless fate disassociates it by leading it to a current of efflux, an occult term meaning quite a different process from that which the ordinary term implies. When it may be carried once more to the borderland where it had perished and take its flight not into space above, but into space within. It will be brought under a state of differential equilibrium and happily reabsorbed. Would somebody like to read this? I hate to keep bothering you guys, but.
So I could read.
Thank you, Truth.
Manvantaric impulse commences with the reawakening of cosmic ideation, the universal mind, concurrently with and parallel to the primary emergence of cosmic substance, the latter being the manvantaric vehicle of the former from its undifferentiated pralaya state. Then absolute wisdom mirrors itself in its ideation, which, by a transcendental process superior to and incomprehensible by human consciousness, results in cosmic energy, Fohat. Thrilling through the bosom of inert substance, Fohat impels it to activity and guides its primary differentiations in all the 7 planes of cosmic consciousness.
Thank you. God, karma. I'm asking this question, what is the relationship between karma and Fohat? I just think that's something that came to my mind because she uses karma as a link. Karma as a link and Fohat as a link. But anyway, let's read on. And this is under her roots and excuse me, her roots and causes. Just at the first flutter of renaissant life, Svabhavat, the mutable radiance of the immutable darkness, unconscious in eternity, passes at every new rebirth of cosmos from an inactive state into one of intense activity, that it differentiates and then begins its work through that differentiation. This work is karma. The cycles are also subservient to the effects produced by this activity. The one cosmic atom becomes 7 atoms on the plane of matter, and each is transformed into a center of energy. And that same atom becomes 7 rays on the plane of spirit, and the 7 creative forces of nature radiating from the root essence. Follow one the right, the other the left path, separate till the end of the kalpa, and yet are in close embrace. What unites them? Karma. The atoms emanated from the central point emanate in their turn new centers of energy, which under the potential breath of Fohat begin their work from within, without, and multiply other minor centers. I just thought it might be at some point, when I get my voice back, it might be a good idea to study maybe the relationship of those two key items there, Fohat and karma. And we're going to end with a couple of slides that are from our Mahatma letters. Both are Master KH. I suppose, oops, how do I go back? Well, I can't go back.
You
here
can
we
use
go.
the back arrow key or the backspace there.
Let me see. Is that doing it? Yeah. Okay, I got it. Would anyone like to read this one from KH, Master KH?
Sure.
Yes, I can read.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, we may say that it is motion that governs the laws of nature, and that it governs them as the mechanical impulse given to running water, which will propel them either in a direct line or along hundreds of side furrows they may happen to meet on their way, and whether those furrows are natural grooves or channels prepared artificially by the hand of man. Spirit, life, and matter are not natural principles existing independently of each other, but the effects of combinations produced by eternal motion in space.
And here, one more for us, please.
Sure. The universal perpetual motion, which never ceases, never slackens, nor increases its speed, not even during the interludes between the pralayas or nights of Brahma, but goes on like a mill set in motion, whether it has anything to grind or not. For the pralaya means the temporary loss of every form, but by no means the destruction of cosmic matter, which is eternal. We say this is perpetual motion. We say this perpetual motion is the only eternal and uncreated deity we are able to recognize.
Thank you very, very much. And other than this last slide, which is actually from Carl Sagan, and I read it and I thought, wow, I didn't know he was such a philosopher. He writes, the cosmos is all that is or was or ever will be. Our feeblest contemplations of the cosmos stir us. There is a tingling in the spine, a catch in the voice, a faint sensation, as if a distant memory of falling from a height. We know we are approaching the greatest of mysteries. I just thought that was very beautiful. He writes, a faint sensation as if a distant memory of falling from a height.
It's great.
All right, let me see if I can get, how do I end my share? Here we go. All right, so.
Thank you so much, Desiree.
Oh, you are welcome. And I apologize. My voice is just, and I ran out of water.
We have a little bit of time if anyone has any questions for Desiree or comments.
And thanks everybody for helping to read. I really do appreciate that.
Jeff?
Right. Oh yeah, hi Desiree. Yeah, that was great. That was really stimulating, and you brought a lot of ideas all together. I still don't understand why, those are the three principles: consciousness, duration, or motion, duration, and space. Why is consciousness particularly associated with motion? So if we think of duration, usually we think of duration as a continuation of some motion over time. Well, at least that's my sort of commonsensical idea about it. Why wouldn't that be motion? Why would consciousness especially be motion and not that?
I and that too. And when I go back and I think about desire rose within it. Because when we tend to think of consciousness, we have kind of a parochial way of looking at it, because we're still thinking about it in terms of in an objectified way. But if you kind of imagine that the subject and the object and the verb now all are one, then that objectivity kind of, we have a different idea of what consciousness possibly could be. And I'm not saying that I have any idea of what consciousness is at that point, but just trying to understand it by number, to me, it all culminates into motion. And this is just one person's way of looking at it right now. I might look at it differently a year from now.
You're in motion.
Right now, it's like everything, the subject and the object culminate into motion in a point.
That sounds like non-motion to me. If the subject and object and the verb or whatever are all just one thing, then it would seem to be not moving.
Well, what do we call the verbum? I mean, we get the word verb as an action word, but what does it really mean? It means action. And that's why I think it'd be a good idea to study karma. She calls the light, the one life, karma. She's also called not motion, but fohat, the one life. She uses them almost like they're brothers. And it has a lot to do with this idea of the noumena of motion. And I think it's related to that, the noumena of divine thought, that desire rose within it. Some kind of energy is reaching kind of an apex. And you know, when they were talking about how that electron gets stimulated with the light, let's say you shine a beam of light onto that electron, that electron gets excited, goes to another state, but then it lets out a proton. Let's just call it a light. It lets out a light, and then it goes back to its ground state. That's kind of, I mean, what does that make you think about in terms of what we've read in theosophical studies? There's an archetype behind that. You know, about getting an impulse and then it leaves again. It's giving an impulse, but then it doesn't stay, it goes away. You know what I'm saying? There's something that's giving an impulse to that desire that is culminating.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it reaches a point where then, like a guitar string, you tighten it, at some point it bursts. Well, that energy is getting released. It's getting released at a different level. It's going to a different, let's say, a quantum state. But then as it goes back down, a light gets emitted. I don't know. There's an archetype in there somewhere.
Okay, yeah, no, I hear you. That's a very.
I'm over talking.
No, you're not. I asked a difficult question. I think you broached on some possible avenues to approach answer.
One of the things about consciousness, though, too, is that we are constantly changing the state that we're in. And we have, of course, the waking, the dreaming, and the dreamless. And we maintain an identity throughout all of them, a fulcrum. And even a state like depression, at first we don't recognize that we are depressed. It's like we have taken on the identity of the state of depression. But eventually what happens is, as you indicated, there is that moment of, where am I? Why am I feeling this way? And that is the consciousness itself. It doesn't enter directly into that depression, but oversees it.
Observes it, yeah.
Observes it. And then once we know that we're depressed and we're in a state of consciousness, then we begin the process of getting ourselves out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes out in your slide where it said the light cannot know light. You can't, when you're in the light, you can't see the light.
You can't know it.
So, yes. And so we have to go through these different states until we begin to realize that we are not the state that we're in, that we begin to take our identity from consciousness itself.
That we learn.
Yeah.
And it really is, I know I've stated this before in different places, but even the people who have died and come back say, I experienced this great love, and I also experienced this great need of learning. And it really kind of takes me to the breath, because when we think of Brahman, we think of this breath coming out, which we could interpret as this compulsion to know, universal compulsion. I'm not just talking about, I'd like to know what this book says, you know. It's a compulsion in the universe to expand. And then there's an impulsion that is represented in this unifying force. We call it love, but it goes well beyond any kind of conditional love we might experience because it's completely unconditional. And this represents that breath, I think. I mean, it's the cosmos expressing in a way this expansion to know, an impulsion or contraction of love on a scale that, you know, we just would overwhelm us, I think.
May I make a comment or say something, Desiree? That was absolutely excellent. Very, very good. You just filled every minute with information, wonderful slides, wonderful quotes, just excellent. And so will this be on a website? It was taped.
That will be Truth to, can you respond to that, Truth?
Yeah, so we leave it up to the participants. If they object to having anything online, then we refrain from doing so. But as long as people are willing to do that, then we're more than happy to share it.
Oh, it was so good. I'd like to pass it on to others. And then I wanted to comment on Jeff's question. So I think it's related to Blavatsky's teaching us that we have from Parabrahman or the one life, we have the two aspects, space and motion. Space going to Mula Prakriti and matter, and then motion being consciousness. And it makes sense when you go back to that very root to me, you know. So anyway, but you just did such a good job over.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate everybody's participation and being patient with me with my raspy throat here. Anything else? Anything else anybody wants to, or just comment on or add to? And you know, we're all learning, and I really enjoy getting feedback from folks.
Would you be willing to comment on the relationship between motion and emotion, because emotion means of motion?
Mm-hmm. Well, what does the E stand for? Is that a outgoing thing, like evolution, and then motion? So I would just, I think they're very much related, but again, everything is in motion. So why we came up with that word emotion, I mean, I haven't looked at it's, you know, etymology of it, but somebody else like to comment on that.
No, I think you're right on the right track. Emotion, and when we think of emote, we're sending out.
Mm-hmm.
So over.
We can't do anything without a feeling.
Yeah.
We don't do anything without a feeling.
Yeah, it's like an impulse, and it's all electromagnetic.
Mhm.
Everything we move, kinetic energy, everything is electromagnetic in nature. So and indestructible. We are indestructible. So when you're feeling depressed, remember that.
Monica?
Thank you. Desiree, this was just wonderful. Gorgeous
Thanks,
slide.
Monica.
I love the where you drew from the various examples and philosophies, just beautiful. But I wondered if you could speak a little bit about, even though you said you'd like to do a total presentation possibly about it, about karma and this movement.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of the cosmos and this movement being totally intelligent in its effort to balance that which is out of balance. Can you
Yeah,
talk a little bit like that, about that?
you know, the masters actually said, and I don't know the page. If I ever could find it again, I'm going to have to put it on my wall. But they said, to really get to the source, you have to study law. Don't worry about going to the absolute. Don't worry about all that stuff. Study law and all these archetypes. And so I really feel like where there is motion, there is law. Where there's law, there is motion. I'm not even sure that they're separate things. But I mean, everything ultimately is one. But I really was kind of interested when I see, and I've seen karma as cited as being the one life many times, to also see Fohan as cited as being the one life. And I'm just curious about that. I don't even know if relationship is the right word, but what exactly, how do they interact? Are they the same thing? I don't know. But I know it put up a big, question mark in my head. And that's why I put it in the notes, because it's a reminder to me to look more into it. All is motion based.
Yes.
All of it. And it's all law. All of it.
So is that the quote you couldn't find?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I have the old book, Mahatma Letters, Barker's.
Oh,
and
you
it's
got
on page 73, and whatever, it's an,
Let me get my book.
so page 73 in that, so all is law. I think you could find it by just looking in the index like I did, under law. So I think
No, really. Sorry, let me get my.
that's an excellent quote. Sorry, you guys, I'm kind of
No, thank you.
going into this.
I'm just gonna mark it really quick.
Sure, page 73, and what letter?
You want to read it?
Oh, it's quite long.
I think we have time.
Well, all is one law. Man has his 7 principles, the germs of which he brings with him at his birth. So he has a planet or a world. Let's see, that right before that, it talks about the one principle. I'd have to read it better too, but
Okay, well, let me see. Maybe it's after that, man.
We have that fundamental statement by HPB also that deity and law are one. And one of the things that is said about manifestation as a whole is that it's not an expansion from a center outwards. It's a transfer from limitless subjectivity into as limitless objectivity. So another way to put that is from the unmanifest to the manifest, or from an arupa, a formless condition, into conditions of form, where there's this gradual, slow, over eons, this slow crystallization of what is pure spirit into matter, right? Into various degrees and levels of matter, which are also levels of consciousness and levels of energy. And so this idea of this cosmic intelligence, which she also says, it's also referred to as Mahat, that Mahat exists also in Pralaya. Mahat doesn't go away. It just goes into an unmanifest condition, right?
Yeah.
So there's consciousness and intelligence at a cosmic level at rest. But it's not as you pointed out, Desiree, I love that quote where it was saying that even in Pralaya, that motion is still occurring.
We'd never come out of Pralaya if it stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, logic tells you that. Yeah.
But then I think this also starts to address Jeff's question, which is it's a difficult one, because if you look at it, she says, well, it's obvious that motion and consciousness, you can't separate the two. Well, modern science does exactly that. You know, so it's not something that's obvious at all. But from an occult perspective, in the way that she's trying to get us to think about it, seems it's this that nothing occurs outside of law, which is karma, which is this eternal motion, which is intelligence, universal cosmic unifying intelligence that goes from a condition of unmanifest into the manifest. And it's through beings, it's all through beings that occurs, that's the other thing that's very difficult to us to grasp. But and not only does the involutionary cycle happen through descending hierarchies of beings, but the evolutionary cycle, the return, happens through self-induced and self-devised effort, right? So it's also dependent on transformations of consciousness rather than form. So the whole thing is consciousness, you know, coming to be and then withdrawing back into itself. So it's just a few ideas to kind of put it in context, maybe.
Thanks so much. Yeah, Kurt. Totally agree.
With what Kirk said, we can see why we're not to allow one thought to go through our mind without examination, you know, and, you know, I marvel at sometimes the thoughts that come through and thinking, boy, I really don't know karma, you know, that I still have a long way to go. When we would look at world events from a whole different point of view, if we could see the forces that work through the karma.
Yeah. Yes. And just add one other point that you know, she describes Fohat as that, as in similar ways to the way Desiree was describing, you know, divine love, that desire that first arose in it, right? It's that which propels the one to become two and three and differentiate, and that whole motion of differentiation into the cosmos, that is Fohat, you know, causing that. That's the energy of Fohat. But she also said that work is the work of karma. So it's karma operating throughout, you know. So you're right. You can't separate the two. No.
I found myself not being able to, you know, based on what I read, and also she refers to Fohat as Eros, god of love. So definitely has a lot to do with maybe one is, maybe it signifies the breath. Maybe you have Eros, which, well, they're both kind of doing the same. They're linking. They're both linking. She calls, you know, karma, she calls them both bridges.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the second fundamental also, right? It's the whole second fundamental, that motion, that perpetual ebb and flow, and it's karma. It's always governed by karma. So you can't, it's inseparable. No.
Well, they were right when they said you need to understand law. That's the thing you need to meditate on, is law.
Yeah. And
but what I find so amazing is that we have examples of that law all around us in this world. And you know, just being able to relate it to some of these abstract ideas. You know,
you did a great job of, you know, taking us through modern science and the, you know, very basic conceptions regarding motion, and then bringing in the occult and the deeply philosophical and abstract. So that was quite an experience. So thank you, Desiree.
Well, thank you guys.
Desiree, can I say, so you said, you know, what's the relation of karma and Fohat? As you quoted, HBB does say that Fohat is an entity, right? And she makes
says the occultists say that it is an entity.
Yeah, occultists say it is, and she goes into some explanation about that, which is really interesting, about the cart and its wheel, and the noise that it makes isn't an entity, but the cart's an entity. But would you ever say that karma is an entity?
I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you consider to be an entity. I mean, we have a very, again, we tend to have a very myopic view of what we term entity, just like we have, you know, our idea of what consciousness is also probably not representative of what abstract thought is. So
Yeah, I've never
what do
heard
you mean by
karma.
entity?
I mean, I've never heard karma referred to as anything like an entity.
Yeah, I haven't either. Only law. So why there's if there is a difference made, I don't know. I just noticed some similarities between the two. And again, it's something that I'll probably have to do a little bit more study on.
You
We
probably,
have seen it said that it's karma is the absolute itself. That we have seen it expressed in that way.
Mhm. Well, she does call it the one life. So
Yeah.
that point where she refers to Fohat as an entity, because she says many different things about it, and she says it's one of the most difficult things to grasp, along with karma. She also says that it depends on, in regards to Fohat, it depends. There are as many different Fohats as there are planes of nature.
but she doesn't mean there's different. What she means is that just like with law changes to accommodate whatever matter it's working with. So it's not like you have all these different separate, fun guys out there. It's just that it changes, it modifies itself according to whatever matter or density it's working within. But yeah, it's like one source with multiple facets.
Yeah.
And law is the same way.
But to a real seer, as she explains, you'll start talking about Fohat in a particular context, and it seems entirely different than the way she's describing it in another context.
Right.
And that's because it's pertaining to a certain plane of experience.
Exactly.
So it can't, when there's both that need for synthesizing, but then also gaining discrimination in regards to, its function on various planes.
Well, I'm sure there's a way to actually mathematically figure out how that separation looks, because everything is based in law. As it moves from a very synthesized state to the very objectified state and all the intermediary states, kind of like that atom electron moving from a ground state to an excited state. I really do think there's a parallel there, but
I like your photon.
yeah, I mean, when I read that, it's not like, I guess it might have been just the way it was written. I thought about that, where she talks about that impulse coming in, but it leaves right away. All it does is it puts in an impulse for everything to start manifesting, I guess, waking up. And I thought, well, it's kind of like what the brain does with the heart. There's an impulse and then it beats, it contracts and expands, right? Whatever that impulse is, it puts out a beam of light, a photon. And maybe there's a pattern to that. I don't know. It just kind of hit me that way.
Do you mind if I ask you, do you have any comment on the question of whether consciousness causes motion or whether motion causes consciousness? That question that comes up a lot.
I don't know if that's a chicken and the egg or not, but if the desire arose in it, at some point it separates itself. Doesn't it? Doesn't it kind of separate something in order that you know, I can sometimes think like a little kid. And as a little kid, I think there's a great knowing or something out there that is trying to understand itself. I know that sounds silly. And that we're all a part of that. But that there's just this motion of consciousness. I don't know if I can answer that question, honestly, because I can't tell if one is operating the other. They almost seem to be the same thing.
Yeah. According to HPB, they're inseparable. They are the same thing from a different point of view.
Thank you.
I think that HPB also said in the key, but this is referring to Manas, that it is a principle and yet it's an entity at the same time, and it's very mysterious. That would be page 183, the complex nature of Manas from the key of Theosophy to Theosophy.
Do you remember what the context was?
Right, so the inquirer just, this is the complex nature of Manas, and the inquirer is asking, but you wanted to tell me something about the essential nature of Manas and the relation in which the skandhas of physical man stand to it. And HPB answers, it is this nature, mysterious, protean, beyond any grasp and almost shadowy in its correlations with the other principles, that is most difficult to realize and still more so to explain. Manas is a principle, and yet it is an entity, an individuality or ego. He is a god, and yet he is doomed to an endless cycle of incarnations, for each of which he is made responsible, and for each of which he has to suffer. All this seems as contradictory as it is puzzling. Nevertheless, there are hundreds of people, even in Europe, who realize all this perfectly, for they comprehend the ego not only in its integrity, but in its many aspects. Finally, I would make myself comprehensible. If I would make myself comprehensible, I must begin by the beginning and give you the genealogy of this ego in a few lines. So that's there's more I could read, but it will go on be over time. So, but that's one. I guess that's one another explanation. I mean, Manas is connected to Manas is connected to Mahat. I mean, that's Mahat. That's been electrified by Fohad, isn't it? Into differentiation.
Yeah, I just tend to think that there's a substratum of based in number of how that energy gets distributed. But when you wanted to say it's related to an entity, it is an entity. And again, I you know, I have a very kind of narrow conception of what an entity is. And so when we think of entity, what are we saying? Are we saying like a synthesis of consciousness? Are we talking about an archetypal, like Mullaprakriti archetypal system? Or does it matter because everything in essence is entity?
Was that like being stuck in maybe in the mindset that like an entity, you would just mean that it's like a core, a congealed force,
yeah,
into materials?
Yeah, I mean, or a body, or
no, HPB talks about in Secret Doctrine. I vaguely remember where she was talking about the cart or something, and the noise that the cart makes when the cart's an entity, but the noise that the cart makes as it's going along isn't an entity, something like that. So she does, it isn't like everything is an entity if we regard it as such. She does have some kind of criteria, but I guess you're right, Desiree, it could be elaborated on or interpreted in different ways.
yeah. It's like, is it a radiation or is it an emanation? Is it a reflection? Is a reflection an entity? Is the sound coming off of the cart not an entity because it's a sound that's basically a reflection of something? In other words, it's, you know, when we get into the abstract ideas, it really forces the individual to contemplate things well beyond what they're used to. And, you know, I can tell you right now, I'm not sure when I read an entity, I know exactly what she's talking about.
Yeah. That's right.
I remember distinctly hearing a theosophist say that one way to look at this is to recognize that there ultimately there is no sound, there's just movement. And I thought I could wrap my brain around that somewhat. It seemed to imply just what Jeff was speaking of about, you know, the sound of the wheels or the vehicle, that kind of thing, that kind of reference. So it seemed to be an effort to focus on the movement as the real actor.
And then what do we know of sound? Because here again, the term, we relate it in something that we know in our environment, but it may be something we just don't have access to right now.
What comes to mind is
The
the line
noumena of sound, I should say.
one off one of your slides. It says, nothing motionless
Mhm.
exists within the universal soul. And looking at that sentence, I feel like for the first time, I don't have a clue as to what is implied by that. But, you know, nothing I do, but I don't. No, it struck something very deep inside of me that says, hey, you don't know what this means. Nothing motionless exists within the universal soul. What do we mean by universal soul and something existing within it?
Well, that is, when we talk about that, the subject, object, and verb, imagine that the subject and the verb or the action are like united. So like right now, even in a dream state, if you think of it like a dream state that you were in recently, or just something that you remember, when you're going through that dream state, you know, there's a center of a consciousness, but it doesn't necessarily objectify its environment, right? That center of consciousness isn't saying, I think I'm going to sit down and read a book, or I think I'm going to sit down and turn on the television or listen to the radio. It's actually that the actor and the action are infused together. One way of looking at it. So it's a different state of consciousness. I mean, it's a different, and then when it's like the actor and the act and the object are all kind of like the quantum. They all start to blend together into sort of a blurriness.
But then something comes to mind in that too. In order for us to see motion, there must be something within us that is not in motion, that is still.
Let me think about that.
Yeah.
Plato says that the soul, he defines soul as a self-moving entity. And so that, and then other things that are not soul are moved from the outside.